is Aaron Roberts with the board of PFLAG. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with an amazing panel today and lead a discussion about allies, advocates, and accomplices. I'm very pleased to have Debbie Jackson on the call with me as one of our panelists. I'm an out transgender person. You can tell I look like your mother. I sound like your brother. You'll get over it. I do a lot of work in queer, LGBTQ, and trans spaces. And of course, we have our star panelists. So I'm going to go ahead and let Debbie, if you'd be willing to introduce yourself for a moment, and then we'll start our discussion after we go through our introductions. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for having me. I am Debbie Jackson. She, her, hers are my pronouns. I am the mother of Avery, who is one of the featured children in the Transhood documentary. I am a member of the human rights campaign's Parents for Transgender Equality Council, and I am an advocate and activist for trans youth.
Hi, my name is Kathy Molig. She, her, her are my pronouns. I'm the Executive Director of Trans Family Support Services, as well as the parent of 2 children. My youngest is Sam, who is trans. He started his transition when he was 11, and I'm very happy to be here with you, all of you.
Thank you. I thought, I watched the film twice, actually, and I was quite touched. As an older trans person, the opportunity for people to live their authentic self more quickly, more soonly in their life, and to be able to pursue that through their life, I thought that was really important and really powerful. And I just wanted to ask, I guess I'm just going to keep the order the same. I'm going to ask Debbie. So if you think about like the experience of doing this and the authenticity and even the public eye, is there one thing that you would like to communicate that maybe didn't make it into the film as clearly or pronounced as you would like?
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity to answer this. As you mentioned, being in the public eye, one of the things that I don't think, as seeing some of the reviews and comments over the weekend, that's been really clear to a lot of people, is that we get express permission from Avery every single time we do any advocacy that involves her. I think because cameras were only in the house during tiny portions of the thousands of discussions that we had over the course of 5 years, a lot of the changes ended up not caught on film. So, for example, we talk about she was offered to have a children's book made and then a book tour, but we didn't go with that book publishing company, so there was no book tour. The one time that she is seen signing books was at a conference that we were both attending together. She was asked like 4 months in advance if she would like to do it. She agreed. She thought it would be great. And then that day she was really tired because she had been walking around the zoo for 8 hours and hadn't eaten before we started the meet and greet time. So it looks like, and some people have said in reviews, that mom drug her from all of these book signings, and that really isn't the case. It was one time. And I want parents to know, if your child wants to be out, they might decide they don't want to be out later. And it's very, very important that you follow their lead. No child should be pushed in front of a camera, pushed to do interviews. You have to ask every single time. And particularly with younger kids, like Avery at her age, she would agree to something, and then 2 days later, or sometimes even 2 hours later, she might decide something else was going to be more interesting that day, and she didn't want to participate. So then it becomes hard as a parent to balance. We've made a commitment. People are here. What do you do? So a lot of times in those moments, even, she would do the bare minimum, answer a couple of questions, and then they would go to ask me to fill in the blanks of the story. And I think that needs to be kind of clarified for people. Follow your child's lead. Don't put them out in the public if they don't want to, and be prepared for them to change their mind. She wanted to be public and now she doesn't. And we have to roll with that too.
Thank you, Debbie. Kathy, I'd like to ask you the same question.
Well, I think, first of all, I think the film does a great job of showing variety, but we have to remember it only shows 4 families, and every family is different. Every trans individual, it's an individual path. And so, it's hard in our human nature to look in at something like this film and not try and make judgments about it, right? Or make judgments about maybe other families, or your own family if you have a trans child, because it doesn't match any of these stories. But nothing matches, right? And just to kind of go off what Debbie talked about, because, when you have a trans kid, many, many families find themselves in an advocating role for the first time. Right. So my son also has disabilities. So I've been in the advocating role since he was 2 months old. But for many families, that's a brand new piece, and you feel almost a responsibility to it. My son was not very open, very public until he lost one of his friends to suicide. And then he had the opportunity to be public and share his story. And he feels a responsibility to do that because he feels if he shares somebody else's opinion, judgment, whatever, that would help another trans kid, he feels he's responsible for that. And so while other people may look in and look at advocacy and being public as this, you have the stage and you're the star, there's a tremendous responsibility that comes with it. And why, like Debbie says, it's really important to check in with your kid regularly as to how they want to handle it, whether they want to be in it or whether they even want you to be that open.
Thank you so much. Like I'm old and been doing this a while. I have 2 stereotypical cisgender heteronormative children. I raised them to be themselves and follow their own heart and whatever's inside to express that. And, I spent my time trying to listen and learn to that and empower that. One of the things I really loved about the film was the very opening that every story is unique. And like, there's a lot of, in the LGBT community, the world at large, even in the trans umbrella community, there's a lot of intentional, unintentional sort of experience validation and comparison. And I always say everybody's journey is their journey. It's unique and it's their journey, right? And so like one of the things, like there's a lot of conversation about fluid or dynamic and about phases. And I love at the end of the film, one of the additional cuts, sort of a follow-up cut was just, so if someone wants to explore, what's the harm? Let a kid explore. And I think the key is, and I'm going to have a question here in a second, the key is to listen to folks. But to me, it's really important to communicate to younger people, older people, to everybody, that everybody's on a journey. And if you felt trans from birth right here, and you didn't have words for it and knew what it was, and you were a lesbian from birth and you didn't have words and you know what it was, but you looked like a dude and they sent you in dude lines, but you got, like it all is different. But there are people that are on an exploration journey, right? And it's not different or less valid. It's that, they went through life, and as they went through life and learned about themselves and understood themselves, they're like, well, maybe this assigned at birth isn't for me, or maybe, I like different people or different things or different experiences. And I really think it's important to highlight that there's not one path and there's not one journey, that it's an exploration, and it's okay with love and support and listening. So I said a lot. So my question is, as you deal with children and children growing up, like what's sort of been your experience with, well, you got to follow this model, you got to be trans this way, or you got to not be trans this way or that way. I just thought I would give you guys an opportunity to speak about sort of the expectations of the journey that you and your children, your families have been on. So, and again, I'm going to keep the order the same so I don't goof it up. And Kathy, I will switch it up later maybe. But Debbie, if you could take it first, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. I do a lot of support groups with other families, and it's exactly as you've mentioned and the beginning of the film mentions. Every story is completely different, and yet at the same time, so many of us have commonalities that we can find. I was meeting with families on Saturday morning, and Avery transitioned to live as a girl at the age of 4. And these other 2 parents had children transitioning at like 13 and 15 to live as boys. And they thought, there's no way you're going to be able to understand. It's a completely different circumstance. And as we started talking, they really understood. It's still the questions, is this, is there any influence on my child? And is this a issue of parenting? And what will the schools do? And how will we tell family? And so many of us have to go through the same processes because of what's happening outside of our homes, regardless of our child's journey. As far as each of us having to figure out the path and the journey and identifying gender, I like to remind cis folk that most of us have gone through journeys and phases ourselves in figuring ourselves out. I remember every single school year, I would decide, this is going to be the year I remake my image. I'm going to try to be different. I'm going to try new things. And then even as adults, I've gone through different phases where I've been a little more feminine, or I really embrace that hippie, earthy side of myself versus wearing jewelry every day and wearing high heels to wearing flats, and our style changes. And there's a slight comparison there in that we're trying to figure out what makes us comfortable and what makes us happy and how we want the world to see us at the moment. Certainly not the same as a trans person having to fight against everything else, and society saying, wait, I don't understand, this is not okay. But if cis people could understand that they also aren't just born and are a one path person their entire life, maybe there would be a bit more compassion to what trans people go through.
Thank you, Debbie. Kathy, would you like to?
Yeah, well, and like Debbie, both of us have worked with hundreds of families of trans youth over the years. And, I find it really beneficial, as I was also going through the path, to have this understanding that as parents, we're trying to find answers that maybe aren't ever going to be there. We're trying to find the answers of, like, how come this is? What am I supposed to do with it? And so we look to things like this film. We look to books. We look to other people to try and find things where we can attach to commonality for our own comfort. And so understanding that, this path is uncomfortable, and uncomfortable isn't wrong or bad. And that many times wonderful things come out of us embracing the uncomfortable. So for newer families, that feeling like the ground you're standing on is no longer secure is a part of the process. And when we can embrace that and not look to fix it right away, but to really lean into it, that's when we can really engage in deeper relationships with our children and the rest of our family and friends. Because when we're okay in the uncomfortableness, everyone else around will be okay in the uncomfortableness of a new transition, of a new journey starting.
I love that. Like when you are authentic in yourself, it just change. I know this personally. It changes the nature and the depth of your relationships and the meaningfulness. One thing that I think is really helpful to help people understand, especially cis heteronormative folks, sorry for all my slang and lingo, is that, there's who we are, and then there's who we're attracted to, right? And then there's how we express all that. And what I find around the trans umbrella and non-binary, because I'm a proud trans woman. I was assigned male at birth, but I'm female-bodied and have no complaints or regrets about that. And I'm non-binary, not because I can't pass, but because I don't want to. Like, I'm just me, right? Aaron is Aaron, and that's how it is. Like, I'm trying to be polite, kind, and respectful, learn to do better and be better, but it's just me. And I think, like, one of the things that has helped people I've worked with is to sort of like, okay, like, you may not be able to relate to the trans part or the my body not fitting, but you may be able to express, as Debbie mentioned, to the expression. Sometimes I'm going to be wildly feminine or wildly masculine, or I'm going to be, a lumberjack, or I'm going to be like, there's all these different expressions, and they're not invalid. They're part of the journey. And for most people, all these Venn diagrams line up so clearly. And it's like, oh, this is how it is. And they never even have to challenge the assumption of like, well, am I a fish swimming in the ocean, or am I a frog that jumps out on the shore? Or they never even think about that. So just kind of thinking about that context, like since we're allies and advocates and general troublemakers for a good cause, loving rainbow people, like, is there anything that you would like to add as far as just sort of what maybe cis or maybe people new to this experience, maybe what they get hung up on, or what might help them get across the bridge to just say, let's figure out what authenticity is, and if it changes or if it's varied, all right, let's pursue this path. And again, all right, Kathy, we're going to go to you first this time, if that's okay.
All right. Well, and I think, this piece of affirming our children, right? When your child comes to you and shares information with you, the first thing I tell families is, please know that this just didn't come as an idea yesterday. Kids don't just share it like that, especially when we're talking about, prepubescent, early tweener into teen. These kids are hanging with this information for a long time. And rarely have I met a youth that wasn't terrified to tell their parents about their gender identity. So take a pause, which is not something we as parents do well in the everyday hustle bustle of our world, but taking that pause and recognizing that this was not easy information for someone to share. And then affirm. I think Debbie said it earlier, following the lead of your child, which again, as parents, that's not an innate sense that we get, that we're going to let our child lead this. No, right? They're too young. How can they know? They're whatever. But that's what all the experts tell us is our job as parents, is to follow the lead. And just like in the film, if that lead changes, you continue to follow the lead, right? Not keeping somebody stuck in a box that they got placed in, whether at birth or later in life, but allowing folks to evolve and change. And that affirming piece is the most loving thing we can do for our children, right? We know the suicide rates. We know the level of anxiety and depression that our kids have. And too many times parents chalk it up to being adolescent, right? That's just part of being a teenager. No, it's really not part of being a teenager. No one should have to suffer with those levels of mental health. And the number one thing we can do to help minimize it, not to take it away, but to minimize it, is to affirm that child's identity.
That was very powerful, Kathy. Debbie, would you like to add something?
Sure. I love what Kathy was saying about how no matter when your child comes to you, this is not new information to them. Some amazing therapists and social workers out there talk about the coming in process as opposed to the coming out process, that every single person comes into themselves first before they are ever able to come out and tell someone else who they are. And yes, even 3 and 4-year-olds can have that coming in process, because 3 and 4-year-olds are inundated by gender stories and gender norms all around them. I have been amazed in speaking with trans people of all ages, including in the pre-K age, who can tell you certain rules and differences between the way boys and girls or men and women are supposed to act, whether it's the appropriate length of hair or appropriate types of clothing, to mannerisms and how people are allowed to sit, and how loud a girl can be versus how loud a boy can be. And even things like the inflection of a voice, that masculine voices tend to drop at the end of a sentence because they are more commanding. They're just making a statement. Whereas feminine voices tend to rise at the end of a sentence, almost as if we're asking a question. And are we permitted to have these opinions? And people notice that. Cis people take it for granted, but trans people, even little kids, are figuring out, yes, that's how I am, and I understand why now I connect with this gender. Or for safety and protection, to be not bullied or to not have a parent angry at them, they have to learn how to emulate that other type of gendered experience. So even little kids are having that coming in process, figuring out, how do I navigate this and do it in a way that's safe and maybe isn't safe. So I have to put on airs. I have to start pretending at a really young age. To what you were saying, Aaron, about how could cis people understand this, think back to when you knew your gender. You probably can't pinpoint a time because you just knew it. It was innate to you. And that's one of the things that so many people forget, is that gender identity isn't something that exists only within the trans people and the trans umbrella. We all have a gender. We all have a gender identity. And cis people are allowed to break some of those rules, and they're even comfortable with everyone else around them breaking some of those rules. You know, are you allowed to look a little more masculine as a girl? Yes. But then if you start saying, but I'm a guy, ooh, suddenly you're breaking too many rules I don't understand. As a little girl, are you allowed to want to play football? Sure, that's awesome. You're tough. You're aggressive. Go get them. Don't let anyone tell you what you can't and can't do. Don't limit yourself. But then if you say, no, it's more than that, then suddenly it's not okay. Little boys can play kitchen and hold the baby doll, but if they want to be the role of the mom, oh, that's going too far. You have to be a boy in the kitchen. And I think a big part of cis society is that we have limitations on how many rules we think it's okay for other people to break. And if too many are broken at once, we suddenly, everything about what we know crashes, and we don't know how to process it. And that's what we need to get away from. Every single one of us is breaking these rules because every single one of these gendered rules is really silly.
Thank you so much. I just thought of a question based on what we've all experienced and are talking about. You know, one of the things I think this film is so important, one of the reasons I think it is so important, is because it provides just an honest view. Most media representation in my life has had trans people as tragic tropes, right? We're either serial killers and evil, we're drug addicts or prostitutes, or we're the murder victim for the first 5 seconds of the episodic crime drama, right? And there is a lot of sort of misunderstanding and scaredness, fear, presumption based on what's been baked into our culture. And I have personal ways that I try to use to de-escalate that at the beginning of a lot of talks I do. And one thing is what you just mentioned. I'm going to do it really quickly. I'm going to ask how y'all do that. Is like when I explain, sexual orientation to people, I'm like, well, when you got your first crush on somebody, you got butterflies in your tummy, right? You felt it, you noticed it. And then, you didn't get a note from somebody saying you need to like Johnny or Susie, or you need to like Johnny and Susie, or you didn't need to like either of them, right? It was inside of you and it came out. And gender identity is very much the same. It can be said inside of you and you can express it differently, but it's just a different level of that same, I feel something inside of me, or I don't feel something inside of me. And they call it this or they call it that. Like, I never understood it. So that was, part of my effort is to help youth and also to help counter these stereotypes that are in our culture that have come from media. And I just wanted to ask each of you, and Kathy, we'll start with you this time, just like if you have sort of any tips or tricks to like help people in their mind, or even to think about and see sort of the bias that comes towards trans people that's built into our culture, that's not unlike the anti-Blackness that we see in our culture. And I just wanted to see if you could comment on that.
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. First of all, it's a big question, right? And so I want to acknowledge that there are many different layers to that question. But I think one of the things that's important is that we recognize when there are people who aren't like us, that doesn't make us wrong and it doesn't make them wrong. And I think if we can come down to people that are different and let's celebrate that rather than making people wrong, it would make such a huge difference in how we accept no matter who it is, no matter if they're trans or lesbian or gay or bisexual or Black or Latino or have a disability or any of those things. Because I have seen in our own personal experience, my son's gender identity is a threat to other people, in particular when he first came out to our friends, because I know what was behind their brain was, what if this was my kid? And what would I do? And because they felt like it was wrong and it scared them. So as cisgender society, looking in on the trans society and seeing that it doesn't make me wrong and they're not wrong, it just is, and acceptance makes all the difference in the world.
Oh, Kathy, that was so powerful. Debbie, I'm gonna let you back clean up. Here you go.
Yeah. When I talk to different groups and try to educate them about things, about how could someone know that they're trans, how can people be non-binary, one simple thing is to remind people that we used to not understand being left-handed, and at one point in time it was even thought to be evil. And I'm left-handed, and I hope that I don't come across as evil to people. How do you know which hand to use? You just naturally gravitate towards one. And even when you have been taught that's not okay, we don't have the scissors for you, you have to use the right-handed scissors. And in generations past, they would force left-handed people to conform. You struggle and it's uncomfortable, and you're just trying to do what you can to get by. And you didn't choose which hand to be, and or which hand felt better and felt more natural to you. It just works. It just is. And there are people who are ambidextrous. So sometimes there are people who that binary use of one hand over another is not there. And I think when you can kind of, again, break things down into something that cis people can understand, it becomes much more easy. I also, during some presentations, will ask people to switch their shoes. And then after a little while they've been sitting there, I ask them to get up and walk around to go break out into different groups or to do some sort of activity. And you can see that all of a sudden, oh, this doesn't feel right. I'm walking around and this is irritating me. And by the time they get back to sit down, you can say, were you able to walk over and do the activity? Sure, you were. Did it feel comfortable? Was there this nagging feeling that something was a little bit off, but I have to get through this, I have to make it work? That's what a lot of trans people might be experiencing. There's this discomfort, and yet I have to deal with it until I can switch and make things right again and make it feel better. So it's little activities like that that kind of can create an aha moment for others to start to understand. But what Kathy was saying about the fear, I think so much of the bias that we have is fear. As in, the left-handed folks were used to, people were afraid of them, thinking that there was something inherently different and evil. But everything in our world has these beautiful spectrums about that. And being trans is just a natural variation. There are more trans people probably than redheaded people. It's, percentage-wise. So it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to realize is totally normal and embrace.
Thank you, Debbie. And thank you both, Debbie and Kathy. It's been an amazing conversation, and just thank you for your time. And thank you to everybody and to your families for helping be willing to share your stories and this in film that will be around for a really long time. Is there, as we sort of conclude our panel, is there any one last thing that, Kathy, that you would like to say?
There is. I want to call out one piece that showed up a few times in the film, and to highlight, because I know there's going to be a lot of friends and family of trans youth watching this film. And those times are when we saw the raw emotion of, in one scene, Debbie, in another scene, the other mom, when they were accessing medical care. And the overwhelming emotion that we saw with the one mom of not sure about these decisions and things like that. And I want to speak specifically to these allies, to these family and friends of these parents, to say, you don't have to question what they're doing out loud, because that question is in their brain all day long. And so what we as parents of trans kids need from our allies, from our loved ones, is the same support that we talk about we have to give to our kids. Follow our lead. Affirm that we are on the right path, whether you agree with it or not. This is not something that any parent just jumps into and says, yes, okay. We spend enormous amounts of time researching, talking to people, going to support groups, meeting with doctors, meeting with mental health providers. Trust that and really lean into being our ally by supporting us and not questioning and judging us.
Wow, Kathy. Mm-hmm. All right, Debbie?
Yeah, thank you. And I would also like to point out at the end, trust the parents, but also parents, we need to trust our kids. You cannot turn a child transgender. You just can't. You can see very clearly that these kids were saying, I've known who I am. And when they have support from their parents, they're able to move forward with confidence and work through some really, really difficult times. But you can influence your child to be afraid of you and that you will not accept them and that they need to hide who they are. So I think we as parents need to be careful too about the message that we're sending to your kids, to our kids. Allies need to understand that too. Parents are not abusive. We're not forcing our kids to become trans. They are or they aren't, or they're going to find that place in between the binaries that works for them. But as parents, if we don't love and we don't affirm and we make comments that this isn't okay, that I'm just tired of it, that this is too exhausting for me, kids are going to hear that. They're going to pick it up and they're going to hide who they are. And that's not fair to anyone. And that's not the kind of parenting we should be doing.
Thank you, Debbie. I just want to thank both of you again for participating in the video, in this panel. Like, I'm an old person that's been through a lot of these, and my heart was moved and touched, and I've learned and felt, and I've got some things that I can do better. And I just want to thank you for sort of that. And the call to action, I think, is really clear: to listen and learn, right? Seek to understand before being understood. And command and control of your kid's gender is just doesn't really work very well. So listening to them works quite a bit better. Thank you again, and have a great day, and please be safe and well.
Thank you.
Thank you.